And there's no better person to talk about the life and times of Dwyane Wade than someone who's been there for almost entirely the whole ride since he's been here in Miami. Jason Jackson. He is the radio voice of the Miami Heat. Also host of the post-game show.
They pay for a lot.
He does a lot of things.
I do whatever they ask.
If you watch Miami Heat local broadcasts, you see this man.
You will find me in your ears and upon your eyes.
And it's funny because one of the clips I saw over the weekend was one of Dwyane trying to interview LeBron in a post-game thing, and you're trying to coach him from just off camera.
I do recall.
And it's like he looks so young and sounds young. You know how people sound young, Jax?
Yeah. Wow.
When you think about Dwyane's career arc, like, do you think of him as that young kid interviewing LeBron, or even younger, that babyface guy in the game winner in the playoffs? Or do you think of him as he, matured in the older version?
Yeah, I view him through this current lens as a bit of a diplomat of life and living it, as an ambassador of this game, now a forever, not just a forever Heat guy, now a forever NBA star. I think you can debate. I tend to go the easy route. I just go look at where guys fit in rankings as it pertains to things that we enjoy.
Right.
And putting the ball in the basket, he's top 30, right? No. So that's all time, right? And you and I talk about it all the time. It's amazing how few people have actually played in the NBA. Like I'm always like, what is it, like 500,000? No, man, it's not even 20,000, right?
It's like 5,000.
Yeah, but still to be in the top 30 all time of anybody that's received this blessing of playing in the greatest league in the world for this sport, that makes you a dude. That makes you an all-time dude. And not only is he a champion, he's now a Hall of Famer, and as you have noted over time, using the club analogy, Dwyane is in the club that's inside the club.
Yeah.
And so that's a really, really cool designation. But no, I look at him now as the team owner. I mean, in several leagues, as he will remind you, by the way, NBA, G League, and WNBA. Get that man a 2K team. All right, he's got the stratosphere.
He's got the Thanos Infinity Stone gauntlet.
And then obviously his presence as it pertains to life and living it as a black man and a father of a child in the LGBTQIA plus community.
Got all the letters.
Did it. And it's exemplary. And makes me think, even though he's 10 years my junior, makes me think about my path as a father. My kids are grown.
Right.
All the time in ways that I appreciate, that you don't always look to a person that's your junior to go, man, there's some things there I need to pick up too.
On the basketball court, where do you think he's most underappreciated?
I don't think people appreciate the sacrifice. Right. Sacrifice is such an easy word to say.
Everyone says, I'll sacrifice whatever to win.
Come on, man.
How many actually do it?
Outside of Udonis Haslem, in the history of the Miami Heat, how many people can really look themselves in the mirror and said, I subjugated myself from my own growth, right? Because could he have just gone on that path of just scoring and scoring and scoring? Absolutely, probably for another 5 years. But would it have been what those 4 years had been in the sense of trying to win a championship and getting the opportunity 4 times and winning 2 of them? And then also, there's got to be a sharing of dough. Let's not think that's they got a lot of it, right?
It's amazing to me how people forget that he left money on the table so that they could pay Chris Bosh and pay who's the other guy that was it? Mike Miller?
No, it was Udonis.
It was Udonis.
And Dwyane had convinced everybody to take just a little bit less because this is the guy we need. Roll the 06. Roll the 06 film from the finals. And I think that was an easy push. But for a guy that took the full mantle of the organization, that torch passed from Alonzo to Dwyane. With all due respect to everybody else, Shaquille and everybody along the way, that connective fiber, what it means to be Heat in Miami, was a direct pass, and he was able to do some things that are unmatched, even with his fellow Hall of Famers.
Now, I know you weren't there for his rookie year.
That was the only one I missed,
Right, but you remember who his vet was? Who was the guy?
Karan.
It was Karan.
Karan Butler was the guy who taught him everything.
Right.
And one of the great stories he tells about Karan, which I have not asked him since Karan has returned as assistant coach, so thank you for the segment that'll be coming up this season, is Dwyane's ability to find the camera. It's one of the savvy, like, young vet things, as when you get knocked down, and obviously the way Dwyane played, he was going to be on the hardwood a lot, but it's make sure you find that baseline camera. Find that other camera. What other camera I need? Like, just so that you have that element of reaching in to your fan base and having all that, boom,
reach in and
you know
grab
what it is? Oh, I'm there. One of the nuanced things that you don't think about, like, the work, of course. Right. Different ways to deal with the nuances of the rules and how to benefit them for you, particularly as a defender more than an offensive player. And then just a little bit of wink and charm and just the sparkle off the front chiclets. Bing.
Which is funny because
you to people.
I've never thought of Karan as being that kind of guy. Well, not that savvy, but that kind of guy as far as...
You're only that type of guy if you're talking about it out loud to the world. But if you just whisper to your little... Remember, that was a one-year separation.
I'm just saying, wow.
That he just figured it out, in 1 year of just like, hey, man, listen, when you hit the deck, man, give him a little, right when you hit the floor. Right.
See, I would have thought that was something that Shaq would teach. Like, Karan has always been to me like such a about the business guy. I can't imagine him going out.
He understood the full circle of the business, which, by the way, a good portion of that is entertainment.
Yep.
So, yeah.
So one of the things, we talked about sacrifice, right? And those 4 years, obviously, going to the finals every year, winning 2 championships. But part of that was the sacrifice. And it wasn't just the sacrifice of the money that we talked about, but the sacrifice of the role. Dwyane, up until that point, and that was a point where he had been finals MVP. He had been all-star consecutive seasons, starting with that first season that you were working there. He'd been all-star game MVP in 2010. So he's an accomplished guy with all the hardware, and they quickly realize, hey, this ain't gonna work unless we call QB1. And QB1 was LeBron. The ball is in your hands. And now for Dwyane Wade, for what I believe to be the first time, certainly since high school, where he's got to play off ball, and that's not easy. And it was an adjustment, but he became really, really good at it. Right. And I believe our friend Cooper Moorhead, who works for Heat.com, coined the term the ghost cut, which is Dwyane's in the corner, I'm a defender, I'm guarding him, my eyes on LeBron, what's happening over here, ball swings, don't worry, I got my, wait a sec, where did he go? Right. Because he already cut, and then you turn around, he's dunking the ball over here at the front of the rim. You ever talk to Dwyane about how that came about? Like that, maybe not that specific action, but just the idea of how do you get better at not having the ball in your hands when that's all you've ever known?
As it was happening, he was really guarded about what was going on. Yeah. Right? Like even the kind of you take it, you take it dynamic that was happening in that first bit
year,
of 10-11 that turned into the kind of that up and down portion in those first 20, 25 games. It was still, till the bump, still relatively just kind of friendly. I think a lot of that came in spaces where I wasn't around.
Privy.
Exactly. Yeah. That was happening probably that next summer. That pain, like you saw it on people's faces. There was no act about that pain from losing to Dallas in 11. And all that did was put jet fuel in everybody's take about how we have to go about this. And the one story that Dwyane tells, I think, is awesome, is just saying, LeBron, you have to be you.
Right.
And we'll all figure it out from there. All of us. I always felt Chris was the first one who really got into the spot, Chris Bosh, of understanding that everything had changed. And I'm now going to be a different guy, and I'm going to have to be out there. And by the way, in here. Oh, and by the way, back out there, helping to defend all over the place. That he probably had the greatest shift in being the number one guy in the franchise to being among the top 3 guys. Right. And then Dwyane, I think, was the one who said it out loud. That just, brother, we will follow you.
Right.
Like we will. I understand what I am and that 06 and all that stuff, but we're just going to have to give that to you. And that was year 2, where I thought that was far more cemented than anything else. The only problem was lockout.
Yeah.
So it was like, when are we going to get this thing? And so the blessing probably is that they had a longer amount of time where they could work together on things. And then by the time we hit, I think, was it Christmas Day? I think was the first.
Christmas was when we started.
First bit of games that season. I mean, it was, let's go.
Yep.
And head down, and then obviously the run to the first championship for that group.
Right. One of the things that I think also doesn't get recognized enough is what a great defensive player he was. He was 3-time all-defensive team selections, but more importantly, I want to say he is the all-time blocks leader for a player shorter than 6'6".
He might be 6'4", but in that neighborhood.
Somewhere in that neighborhood.
Right.
And, obviously you got to see your fair share of incredible plays. Are there any that stick out? You say to yourself, oh, man, I'll remember that time he did this.
Yeah, there's so many. There's a bunch of steals into game winners. I think there's one against Chicago, one against Phoenix.
Yeah.
I think were you working? Were you still in Phoenix?
I don't remember.
I'm not sure either, but it was in Miami.
I remember the shot.
There was one was a block and one was a rip. I think the block was against Chicago. I think that was this is my house.
Yeah. The El Heat jersey is what I
exactly. Exactly.
I'll never forget that.
John Salmon, my man. Always in Heat history forever. And then I think yours was in overtime. I want to feel like it was an extra session for that. But the one for me it was one of those battles against Cleveland. And Dwyane and LeBron are going back and forth. And LeBron tried to block a big, and I think there was, maybe a deflection off the hand. It wasn't a full smothering. And trying to think of the big man who was playing with LeBron at the time. Big, crazy hair.
Oh, Varejao.
Yeah. Went and got Varejao at the apex.
Yes.
And then turned to LeBron and said, that's how you do it. Wait a minute. He went up on Varejao, who is all of 7 feet.
And a very good defensive player at that. It's not just a stiff out there.
But he went and got him defensively. Pinned his stuff, I believe, at the apex. I think it was just, here comes Varejao, Dwyane comes weak side, and blocks that joint. And steps over him.
Was that the same game he dunked on Varejao, or is that a different game?
I think it might be the exact same.
Because this is the nuts thing. Like you're describing, I was thinking about the dunk.
You're thinking about the dunk on the other end. I think there was a block on the other end, or it might be the same thing, and I'm deep in folklore right now.
I mean, look.
I might be lost in folklore.
That's why you're here, though. We came in for the folklore right now.
Oh, man.
So the dunks.
Oh,
He's got a lot. A lot. Are there ones that stick out from that? Where the Varejao dunk obviously is one that everyone thinks of, but are there any other dunks that you can think of?
Oh, man. I think the best one probably is the one I wasn't around for. Second round of the playoffs, chest to chest on JL.
Oh, yeah.
I don't even know if they won that game. I know they didn't win the series, lost 4-2 in that series. But that was when I was sitting on the couch at the crib in Connecticut looking for employment.
Were you like DiCaprio in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
Exactly. I had no idea the next year I'd be covering the man. But that one is one of the better ones. The Varejao, which I probably mistold, is the one that stood out. There's another play, though, that it led to a dunk. That's one of my favorites. And I believe it was an ABC game, again against Cleveland. And Dwyane's coming down the left sideline as he's going back toward where the dancers sit, so away from the Irie end going. It's lovely how we can talk about Kaseya Center in these very understandable ways. But I believe that's the west side. And he saves the ball from going out of bounds. Behind the back, mid-court lob to Shaquille for the throwdown. Like, it's just one of those, as you create the tapestry of stuff, it stays in my head. And that's not him scoring.
Right.
Right?
But, the crazy thing is, it's now known. Everyone, if you ask anyone in the organization, anyone in the 305 in South Florida, hey, who's the greatest player in franchise history?
Right.
It's Dwyane Wade.
Period.
At what point did people realize? Because I always think about that in terms of, we talk about Steph Curry being the greatest shooter in NBA history. He was a great shooter always. And then at some point we're like, he's got it and there's no other name on this list. Right. At what point did people have that feeling? Was it pre-LeBron or was it after LeBron left when then people realized he's not going to end his career here?
No. It's interesting because you do have to make the distinction. The greatest player to put on a Heat uniform versus the greatest player in Heat history could be two different answers.
They are two.
Right? Because LeBron James put on that uniform.
Right.
It's the greatest player of the generation. So you can't say he wasn't.
Well, and you could also argue that, he might not even be number two. Say Shaquille O'Neal. In terms of
where you rank in the pantheon of NBA history, correct. But for what he was, for the time he played there, it's just not a debatable thing when you take tapestry of time, impact on organization, history book, the reach beyond the confines of then American Airlines Arena, now Kaseya Center. There's just not a parallel, right? The closest person who comes to mind is Alonzo.
Right.
Because of that foundation setting, not taking anything away from Tim, but Alonzo was first and he stayed longer, and that's how that stuff tends to imprint itself. So we get everybody out of your mentions on that. Yeah. But when it felt that way, it might have been the return. It might have taken that long to articulate it.
Right.
You can look at the history book and realize Dwyane was the best in everything that mattered.
Right.
But to say to yourself, because you're thinking about the end a little bit more, that when he was done with the sojourn, as I like to call it, with Chicago and Cleveland, and he's making his way back, and you're really like on your knees, hyperventilating. Oh, so glad. Glad.
What was that time like?
When he was away, or
of him leaving, which I don't think anyone really thought would happen at the time.
Till it did.
Till it did.
Right. It was strange. That's the kindest thing I can place looking back. I think everyone is on the record that it was regrettable. Like that it could have been handled differently and better. Dwyane could have probably been a little more articulate about his feelings. The organization could have been a little more aware that how many whales you're going to chase before you take care of the whale that's already in your pool. You know what I mean? Sorry, I grew up in Ohio. Shamu reference.
Look,
we had SeaWorld.
Yeah, whale hunting is a Rileyism, right?
It's the deal. But you put some of that aside, I don't think there was ever a disconnect to what he was and what he had done, which is hard to do when there are 3 titles. So if it was cemented for most people, and I can hear fans in my head already go, "Oh, I knew when." Yeah, okay. But articulating it,
right,
pointing to it and going, "That's the greatest player who's ever played in Heat history," could have been after the second to third trophy went up.
Right.
After that series against San Antonio. I think that's reasonable. If somebody says that's their line.
Right.
But I think his departure made us all go, whoa, there just went the greatest player in Heat history, and therefore saying it more than just thinking it or reading it. Right. I think you can stamp that line in the timeline.
A character in Dwyane Wade's story who is a fixture, who I believe you're going to be going on Springfield one day to do a feature on him as well, is Erik Spoelstra, right? The top 15 coaches of all time, and the greatest coach in franchise history, maybe? Or is that too much? Will Pat bristle if I say that?
Numbers never lie, my man.
Well, he's got a ways to go.
Well, I'm saying with the Heat numbers.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Okay.
Yeah. You said in franchise history, right?
Yes, in franchise history.
Then the numbers
it's the same thing as LeBron and Wade, right?
It's very challenging, right?
So,
exactly.
But Spo's ascent kind of shadowed Wade's ascent.
Right.
You know, we have so many pictures and those stories of Spo in the video room and working out with Wade as a rookie.
Right.
And then he moves to the bench and he's on Stan Van Gundy's staff, and then he moves up and Pat Riley's staff, and then Pat Riley hangs it up and Spo takes over, and we get those years of Dwyane Wade super dominance, right? Where the scoring title happens, where basically the best individual parts of his career happen.
The MV3 days,
right?
Yes, as we called it around here. Yeah.
Take us behind the scenes of that relationship between those two men, of seeing their careers flourish kind of in a symbiosis from humble beginnings to top 75th anniversary honorees.
The wonderful connective piece is, as you noted, the first development coach, the work that you're doing after practice, before practice as a young player. That was Spo for Dwyane. I think the hardest transition wasn't development coach to front of the bench. It was front of the bench to the first
head
seat,
spot.
because the head coach doesn't do that stuff anymore. And
well, not only that, but also the communication style changes drastically, doesn't it?
It isn't like, hey, let's sit down and whisper about stuff and then go to coach. It's like, well, you're coach. And so if my memory serves me correctly, I think Fizdale jumped inside that space for Dwyane initially, and then it evolved. I'm not sure exactly. My memory's not serving me well who became that later. But I think Spo would have probably maintained that as he was trying to figure out what are the lines I'm going to draw as the head coach, allowing my staff voice and action. When you are an assistant that came up the way Spo did, you probably have a sympathy that some guys can't have because they didn't have those jobs. Right? And so it's opportunity, it's voice, it's understanding how that work gets done and how hard it is, and maybe not being such a heavy hammer. Maybe the hammer's now velvet instead of that hammer and anvil we're always talking about at our place. And so I think Dwyane's been clear and on the record that it wasn't always cute, because it is those heat of the moment. Now the only discussions you're really having are heat of the moment. And thank goodness that is embraced in a certain way inside the Heat organization, because that stuff can become public quickly because you see it, right? And then the question's coming, and if the coach doesn't have enough security or thick enough skin, that can just be something that spills over and is negative throughout, but it just never was for them. And it felt like, recently Spo has talked about the security blanket of Udonis, right? I think that first started with Dwyane. And then when Dwyane is gone to Cleveland and Chicago, that goes to a whole nother level with Udonis. Someone who understands this place and understands me and has been a part of my entire growth. That's got to feel good as a head coach.
It's a security blanket.
Yeah, because as a head coach, there's a lot of ghosts, right, in the room. You're like, what was that? Somebody coming for me? What is that? And I think that probably had to dissipate for Spo after a while. But it's still the reality of success versus not, and how long will an organization that's not like Miami tolerate that? We know the answer to that.
We saw it this summer with a bunch of guys that won championships.
So those guys, both Dwyane initially and probably, obviously, forever. It is a unique relationship that is, as Pat has coined it, they are forever men for a reason, because you got to the mountaintop, you got to stand there and hold all that gold in the air.
What are you looking forward to the most this weekend at Springfield?
It's always the same for me, the speech. The articulation of appreciation for everything from getting in the car to get to the gym and games and practices when you were single digits, and for Dwyane specifically in one of the hardest neighborhoods in all of America. And then getting to the point where you are now, where you're looking at things in a rearview mirror with probably the best vision you've ever had of your life, of your life, which you got to get to 41, 45, 50 to really have those abilities as a person to be appreciative of everything, including the hardest of things. And so I'd asked Dwyane twice prior to sitting down with him during Summer League for the interview that we're using for his Hall of Fame special. And he hadn't gotten to it because he wanted the speech to come to him. A lot of people will hire a professional, or they really are going to take the time to first write it out, then type it out, then start practicing it. And I think because Dwyane has spent some time in our industry, he knew that there's a bit of performance to it, but he wanted to be authentic in the way that he went through telling his story and thanking people along the way. And I always do kind of monitor what breaks the person down.
Does he cry?
I think he has to, like, the emotion of where he came from. And I don't think we ever really I think you have to go to Chicago. I think you have to go to Robbins and look around and go, oh, hell. I grew up in the suburbs, my man. I went to church in the hood. So it was like 2-3 days a week. I'd slip out the comfort of my 70 babies excellence, right?
Yeah.
Of the black family that I felt like we were the first generation who didn't have to fight for something. There were fights along the way. We didn't come out the womb marching and fighting for rights.
Right.
And so I think about my parents' success, both being college graduates in the suburban neighborhoods we lived in Ohio. I have no regret, and I never, ever debate what my parents did for us and elevating or diminishing our blackness. Those are ridiculous conversations. But when you recognize the struggle of so many young people in our community throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and beyond, right now, as we're talking, you better have some level of empathy, if not full sympathy, because of your own experience, that when you don't have a full understanding of where the next meal is coming from, or where is mom, or how am I getting to school, or is schoolwork even important? Because those cats down the street seem to have it all figured out.
Right.
Like all that stuff, that's the stuff where I start getting emotional, because he had damn near nothing. And thank goodness for his sister and his father to come in and, take care of the space when his mother was dealing with her problems. Right. And thank God she found her way all the way back around. So it's a beautiful American story. It's a love story in many ways of life and basketball and excellence that will make me weep as I'm sitting there. So the fact that he's going to be reading off prompter and trying to get that done, good luck, buddy. Hope he doesn't put out the bets. Like some of those guys bet, like at what point they're gonna they're gonna lose it. So
you know what network we're on. We're definitely taking that action.
Yeah.
When's he gonna cry? All right. Yeah. His name's Jason Jackson. He is the radio voice of the Miami Heat.
Jax, Charlotte Wilder here. Got one quick last question for you.
Here?
Wait, you been here this whole time?
Yeah, well, you guys were having such a good time, and I'm not in the room. I wanted to just let you cook, but what is one moment with Dwyane and the fans, like whether it was a reaction to something he did in a game, or something that you saw between a fan and Dwyane when other people weren't around, that stands out to you?
I want to clear with Amin that I should answer this question.
Go. I've literally just located where she is. In the corner of a Zoom screen on a laptop, in the control room.
You don't have to clear anything with Amin, Jack.
Fair enough. To that point, I believe this is my house moment is the one that is forever. Watching him win a game, hop on a table, everybody's on their feet. If you guys could find the still of it, there are these faces and moments that are critical. Miami Heat CEO Nick Elhassan pumping his fist to the right, to the left, my friend and colleague, now moving into his 36th season as the television voice of the Miami Heat, Eric Reed, full arms extended. I'm sure down to the left, there's Uncle Tony Fiorentino with a strong, yeah, baby! That right there, even though it wasn't a championship moment, even though it wasn't something that propelled the team in any significant way, from a seeding standpoint or wherever, it was the moment where if you hadn't already decided that Dwyane was the guy, you realize he was then, because then there were the other iterations of it, of another game winner when he just kind of slow moves the, or on the return, the winner against Golden State.
He tried to get on the scores table, but Father Time told him, hey, man.
He might have made it that night as the one where I invited him to go to the table again. It was the last home game. And he went to go get it, and the first time he had to come back down. And he rammed up there again, though. But to be able to jump on that far side table, opposite the scores table, and have those 19,000 people, and then the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that embrace him and the Miami Heat brand, that's it. That's a Superman moment, the cape and everything.
I think we can say unequivocally, Dwyane Wade is the reason why the Dolphins are no longer Miami's number one team in the hearts and minds of the people of South Florida.
Yeah.
The Heat. This is a Heat town first and foremost, and the Dolphins come second.
It's so crazy to think of it that way, because you do still walk around town, or as we like to do, drive. And I think football's still in the dirt. I really do. Like, the really great young athletes in South Florida are still football players.
Yes.
But they love basketball.
Yeah.
And there are great basketball players that probably didn't exist at the youth level because of that dream that you're talking about. And baseball will always have its footprint here because of the nations that find those kids from other nations find their way here. But it is so different from when I arrived because after the '06 championship, the Dolphins had a really good season right after that. And I mean all the energy went in that direction. I was like, man, I don't know if we'll ever really be able to move to that first slot. But man, when it just kept coming with Dwyane's excellence and then the addition of LeBron and Chris, I don't think we've moved from this spot. But I'm also not as insane to believe that a real Dolphins run that got them to a conference championship or to a Super Bowl wouldn't make this place go nuts.
I guess what I would say is, I won't say basketball is the favorite sport down here, but if you have to pick the pro team, that is.
Thank you.
Thank
you. I thought you were going to say, like, because I never want to do the Marino Wade thing. Like, people try that one, and that is just.
Well, that one's generational.
I want out of the sanctuary.
That one's generational, right? Because
it has. It might be.
You and I have talked about this before in terms of there was a marketing campaign that he did. I believe it was last season, the 35th anniversary, and it was kind of like a family watching. And it's like, oh, Miami's going to award a franchise, and it goes through time, and you see the little child grow up, and then become a father himself, and then have his kids and seeing how it grows in the household of people, basically this fandom, this thing that was born in many people's lifetime, now becomes this thing that generations of people who have their own kids, that's all they know.
Right.
And so in that standpoint, I think there's a part of this where, when you say Marino versus Wade, there are 30-year-olds, 30-plus-year-old people walking around, married with children and homeowners and spending money on entertainment that didn't experience Marino
at all.
So that answer really kind of tells me like more about your age more than anything else. I'm sure for older people, nothing over top Marino, but if you're someone who's, I would say, under 40, maybe 45, there's only one answer.
Right. And the empirical dynamic of just going 3 championships.
Yeah. Zero.
And then they're done. But I stood there and covered the man for 2 seasons and admired that period for 13. And his number hangs in the rafters of Kaseya Center for a reason.
Yeah.
And everybody can mock it. They can do whatever they want.
Well, we know what the reason is.
But when you realize...
The reason was the ticket sales weren't doing so well. Like, what's that? 07,
it's still
08?
there, I mean.
07, 08?
It's still there.
That's why that's...
It's still there. Anywho, what a
Jason
good conversation.
Jackson,
Thank you, bud.
Thanks a lot.
Yes, sir.